Hey everyone, this is a video response to Pete's Snestastic about piracy and how it was like for you growing up. Before I start though, I recently watched an Ask Snez, which has come back, and someone asked him how he makes his tea, and I will say what I'm drinking now is the tea he recommended, but this is what I do. I'm just going to throw this out there for Pete. Take a little bit of Cool Whip and put it in. I know, but I discovered this when I had this ice cream out. I was trying to find different ice creams for old people like me who have a problem with dairy, and most of it was real brittle and dry, and it wasn't good. Well, I would add a tablespoon of Cool Whip, and that would make it creamy like normal ice cream, but without all of the terrible pains. So I decided to try it in the tea, and it makes it just right. Pete, just give it a shot one time. That's all I'm asking. But this is on piracy growing up. And this is one thing I find really interesting about YouTube is how I see videos from people all over the world, and I predominantly watch, I think, European-based channels, just because when I started watching YouTube back in '08, that was really who I saw. Like, Pete was one of the first people I checked out, and so I would watch people who watched his video, and back then there wasn't a ton of variety, so I just stuck with what I liked, and I would just follow one channel to the other, and I'm still watching those years later. But what's interesting is how overseas computers were gaming machines. That just was not a thing here. The only games we really had was Oregon Trail and Winter Games on the Apple IIe at one of my elementary school, and those were monochrome monitors. And I know Oregon Trail is a game, but I was always very suspicious that it was trying to teach me more than it was growing up. So while I enjoyed it, I was always a little leery about how much fun I was actually having. But, sorry, I'm getting over a little bug here. Let me take another sip. But piracy is for computers. This really didn't exist for a long time because my dad got us a Commodore 64, and we were the only people I knew with a Commodore 64. We had two games, which were math games, and a paint program, and that was it. At school, no one else had a computer. We were the only people I knew with any sort of computer, either IBM clone or whatever. Now, later on, he got an IBM clone of a 286, and that's when we kind of started copying things. And actually, it was him. He would go to work, and he would come back with boxes of 5¼ inch diskettes. Now, because I didn't grow up thinking of the PC as a gaming machine, when he had games for it, they just weren't that big of a deal to me. They just seemed like asides, really, because computers were for work. That's what I and pretty much everyone I grew up with associated computers as for a long time. That's what you do spreadsheets on. That's what you type Word reports on. That's really it. Because the computers in elementary school were simply for typing. That's it. It was a typing class. So when he would bring games over, it was stuff like Blackjack or Battleship. And, that was fun and all, but I really didn't care because I had a Nintendo. When I was really young, they had an Atari, and they gave it to a neighborhood friend of mine, and we got an NES. So that's what I grew up with. To me, that was a game. And then later on, the Genesis. That's what games were. Mario, Sonic, bright colors, they're fast. Well, after we had the 286 for a while, I started going to bargain bins, and that's when I started getting into role-playing games, especially Wizardry. I found Castles 2 in a bargain bin at Office. I went to Office Depot almost every week. My dad would just take us out to give my mom some time alone, and inevitably we'd end up at Office Depot, and they had this big metal bin of computer games. And back then, PC game prices dropped really fast. So if I saw a game in a magazine, within 4 to 6 months, unless it was like Doom or X-Wing, it was already in the bargain bin. So that's how I picked up Castles 2 for under 10. What was it? Castles 2, Wizardry 7, I want to say, Dark Crusader, Blake Stone, I think was another one. Oh, Colonization. So to me, the computer was strategy and role-playing games. Now, you could play role-playing games on console. I owned Ultima Exodus for the NES, but that was the only role-playing game I had. And you really couldn't do strategy on console. So, and even today, my perception of PCs is still that's for first-person role-playing games, and isometric. which is slightly different from that top view you got with the early Final Fantasies and Dragon Quest, and strategy games. And strategy games it still pretty much holds because the mouse and keyboard is just so much better. But that was as a growing up, that's what I associate with. So anything else he brought home, I really didn't even consider where it came from because it wasn't a real game. It wasn't, again, but to a young kid, what is blackjack? That's not that fun anyway. But I dug through and I found some early examples, and these are really early. To be honest, I don't know where the 5¼ inch diskettes are anymore. A few years later, we got a Pentium 90, and so I went through the 3.5-inch diskettes I still had, and the only ones I found were my old Warcraft 2 boot disc, which I wrote save on in my sloppy handwriting. I must have been about 13 or 14. Now this is when I just discovered emulators. It says Phantasy Star 2 and 3. I erased Gunstar Heroes and Castlevania Bloodline. I don't know if that's a fair trade these days, but at the time I probably played through the other two, needed the space, threw in Phantasy Star. Like I said, consoles were role-playing machines for me for the top view. That's another weird thing. If I've played a role-playing game, and a few shareware role-playing games were on PC, the traditional Phantasy Star, whatever, Final Fantasy view, it didn't click with me. I would just be like, oh, this is like a throwaway. Put it on a console, I would have loved it. Alternatively, put a first-person role-playing game on a console, I don't know what they're doing. Put it on a PC, and I loved it. Kids are weird. But the only game I found pirated was my dad's Video Poker. So, of the diskettes, this is the only thing I found. Now, where piracy kind of ramped up was when CD burners became available. Now, I didn't have one, but a friend of mine, that was his thing. Like PC games, burn everything. Console, you had to have a mod. And again, I see these videos of people in England, and they find these PS1s with mod chips all over the place. I bought a mod chip off the internet, and that same friend who had a burner, his dad installed it for me, and it still works, but I was the only person I knew that had a mod chip in anything. Like, they just didn't exist down here. And because I didn't have a CD burner, I couldn't easily copy games, so the mod chip really only became a way I could play imports from the early stores you could get online, like, was it called Buy-Right? They were like a wholesale importer with kind of business practices. And in National Console support, I would import stuff from them. So instead of playing backups, it was just a way to play imports. Now, when I got a CD burner, I was past the PlayStation. I had opened my Saturn to see if I could mod it with a chip. It was so confusing looking. I immediately closed it, put it to the side, didn't even think about it. I didn't get my Saturn modded till like 3 years ago, or probably about 5 years ago now. However, what was easily burn game friendly is the Dreamcast. Now, I owned an import Dreamcast, so what I would do is I would play burns of imports to try them out before they came here, because when they came here, I had to do a swap with the controller board. I mean, the controller. If you open a Dreamcast, there's a little board for the controllers. There's a ribbon. You had to unplug the ribbon and plug it back in. Well, after a while, that started messing with the ports. Like the fourth player port went out, then the third one, and then it got spotty. So I really wanted to make sure if I was going to play a US game that I would really like it. So I didn't know how to rip GDR or something like that. I didn't know how to rip those back then, but I could burn them. So I would burn the import, and if I liked it, I would pick up the US copy, because then I would feel it was worth the risk to the damaging the system, because I really wanted to play the US. Eventually, I just got a US system, but I used this program called Direct Connect, and what you had to do though is let these ads run, this banner ad at the bottom, and you had to click every few minutes for it to stay connected, so they would earn money through the banner ad while you downloaded the game. And I would set my alarm throughout the entire night and wake up every like 45 minutes, hour and a half, and go smack the mouse and go lay down. And I did that for so long. I got the worst sleep back then. But these actually are the first cases I've had of discs not working anymore. So when you see this was actually frame grid. And what happened was, probably 3 years ago, I was going through my burned disc and seeing what they were, and none of the Dreamcast games worked anymore. So what I ended up doing is just using them as coasters, and when they get about this level, I toss them. And that way everything's just on, I'm assuming they're all just the games, but if I ever backed up anything personal on them, that's destroyed. And I'm just lazy with coasters. Don't want to go buy one when I have stacks of these. But yeah, these are the first examples of discs no longer working for me, are my Dreamcast backups. Earlier PlayStation backups still work. But like I said, I would go on and buy the game. So now here's Frame Grid, the import. There's only, I think, two Dreamcast games I ended up not buying, which was Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, because I ended up getting the PlayStation 2 version on the Anniversary Collection, and Lost Gollum. Well, Lost Gollum was way more expensive than I ever anticipated, so I never got it. But every other game I burned, I either got the US or Japanese version of. So here's Frame Grid. Now, in terms of other copies of stuff, I didn't actually play any backups of any system after that. But what might be considered piracy is like fan translations and stuff. Now, before the Retron 5 and the Retro Freak, if you wanted to play the game on a console, you had to buy a patched version or send your import off for someone to swap out the EEPROM chips. Now, I did that for a while, but that just kind of that was a hassle. So those will work on a real system, but most of them won't work on a Retron 5 or Retro Freak. But here's an example. So this is a repro of Front Mission Gun Hazard, a side-scrolling action game like Cybernator. Is there going to be a glare? Yeah, there's going to be a glare. A lot of glare. So you can see, it's a fun mech side-scrolling action game based in the Front Mission universe. So since I got this, what I ended up doing is buying the import, because I just wanted that. If I'm going to get the unofficial version, then I really want the official version. And at the time, I couldn't play these yet because I hadn't got my Super Famicom, but I eventually bought one for that reason. So it's just fun to go through the original version. Now, of course, I can put this in a Retron 5 or a Retro Freak, apply the translation patch, and I don't need that one anymore. But just to make sure I had the official with the unofficial, I would buy the import. Now, these days, I don't download the ROMs of them either. What I do is put the cart in and apply the patch. So this is a Fire Emblem that never came out over here, but it does have a fan translation. I think there's still, it might be slightly buggy, but it's, you can play through it. It's just maybe text will go off the menu a little bit here and there. But yeah, so instead of just getting the ROM of this with the patch applied, I went ahead and got the official so I could pop it in. And now that works in most cases. There's a few like, well, it goes by, people call it Far East of Eden and East of Eden, but it's the official name is something else. It recently got fan translated. I could not get, you can't get that cart to work because of the way the people translated it. You need a Excel spreadsheet, or just a spreadsheet really, for some of the text. So I had to download a ROM of that, but I owned the official one. And what's the one that came out for the Trails in the Sky, like a special edition? Came out recently for the Vita. Well, I could not get that to work, but I bought an official copy. So Senkai at Accidental Gamers helped me get a ROM or a download to work with it already patched. Like I said, these days I try to go official wherever possible. I really just don't have. To me, just getting a file doesn't entice me to play it. I like to touch something, because once I've taken this out of the box and I put it in the system, I've committed myself to trying it. So piracy was never a big thing for me, mainly because I'm sure as a kid I would have indulged in it, but the games you could have pirated back then, like my dad would, I just weren't interested in. He'd bring home Test Drive or something, and you need these massive manuals or these cheat sheets because it had copy protection. Just wasn't interested in doing that. I'd rather go play Mario or Zelda or something. And so it never took off down here. That one friend that had a CD burner, he did PC games. He was the only person I knew that messed with PC games, and the only person that copied them. No one else, including him, had a mod chip. No one else, including him, played consoles, games, copied, or downloads. I had one friend that did try emulators with me. That's why this diskette was made. I remember he came over one weekend. We kind of looked up what emulators were, and I immediately made him like 3 diskettes of games, and I made a few myself. But he doesn't do that anymore either. That was just more like a lark. So yeah, piracy did not really exist for me as a kid. We had boxes of computer games I didn't want to play, and neither did my friends. And I didn't even associate that with copying or theft or anything. To me, these are some boring games that would go on a boring system, which would be an IBM clone. That's what you do for work. So of course the games on there wouldn't be that great. I'm going to go back with my Nintendo, or I'm going to go play Shinobi, the real games. But even when I could get the chance to, I never really did, because unless it was to try a game before I bought it, it just never really interested me. But yeah, that's my history with piracy, or kind of lack thereof. But thanks for asking, Pete, and I'll see everyone later.